You ever get that feeling you're reading about some complex topic and you just wish someone would cut through the noise and tell you what's really going on?
Oh, absolutely.
Well, consider this your shortcut to being well-informed. Today, we're diving deep into the world of industrial policy and global manufacturing.
Okay.
You've been looking into this lately.
Yeah.
And it looks like you've been digging into Karen Thompson's recent paper for the Heinrich Foundation. Heavy stuff, right?
It is. It is.
Don't worry, expert speaker is here to help us unpack it all.
Yeah, happy to be here. It's a dense paper, but it's really interesting. There's a lot to unpack there.
Okay, so industrial policy might sound a little buttoned up, right? But trust me, this is where things get interesting. Thompson argues that after decades of taking hands-off approach, countries are suddenly obsessed with using subsidies to boost their domestic manufacturing.
Yeah.
It's like a global chess match with everyone trying to outmaneuver each other.
It really is. And Thompson specifically points to the Biden administration's Inflation Reduction Act, or IRA, and the CHPS Act as major turning points. These acts, despite their names, are basically huge subsidy packages designed to revitalize American manufacturing in key sectors. Things like electric vehicles, batteries, the semiconductor industry, areas the U.S. considers strategically important.
And it seems to be working. Thompson mentions how Volkswagen saw the IRA incentives and basically said it's a gold rush. They decided to build a massive new EV factory in South Carolina. Plus, since that IRA passed, there have been over $110 billion
Wow.
in new clean energy manufacturing investments announced in the U.S. alone.
Yeah, it's a big deal. And it's not just happening in the U.S. China's been heavily subsidizing similar sectors for years. Their Made in China 2025 plan is a prime example. They've poured billions into things like electric vehicles, solar energy, lithium-ion batteries, and it's helped them become global leaders in those areas.
So the U.S. and China are going all in on these subsidies, but what about everyone else? How are other countries reacting to this?
It's been a mixed bag of reactions, but one thing is clear. Everybody's feeling the pressure to keep up.
Okay.
Take the European Union, for example. Initially, they were pretty frustrated by the IRA, seeing it as a threat to their own industries.
Right.
Their solution, fight fire with fire.
I like how you think.
They're creating their own subsidy programs to compete. One example is the EU Sovereignty Fund. They're hoping this will help level the playing field.
Wow, sounds like we're headed for a full-blown subsidy arms race.
Huh.
Thompson also talks about South Korea and Japan, two major players in the manufacturing game. What's their strategy?
Well, they're trying to play both sides. They're taking advantage of the IRA incentives where they can, like with batteries and EV components, but they're also boosting their own domestic subsidies to remain competitive.
Oh, interesting.
Even Australia, which has a smaller manufacturing sector, is getting in on the action with a 15 billion Australian dollars subsidy program.
So we're seeing this huge wave of government investment in these industries all over the world.
We are.
It makes you wonder, is this sustainable? Where does it all end?
That's the billion-dollar question, isn't it? One potential risk is that this could distort free markets and potentially even lead to trade wars.
Yeah.
If everyone is subsidizing their own industries, it creates an uneven playing field, and that can lead to all sorts of problems.
Okay, so we're seeing governments around the world digging deep into their pockets to support these industries.
Yeah.
But it makes you wonder, what are the potential downsides to all of this?
Yeah, that's a great question. And that's exactly the kind of critical thinking we need to apply here.
Right.
It's not all sunshine and rainbows.
Right.
One of the biggest concerns is that this could warp the free market.
That makes sense. Companies making decisions based on government handouts instead of, actual demand.
Right, and if everyone is propping up their own industries with subsidies, it creates an uneven playing field. That can lead to trade wars with countries slapping tariffs on each other's goods.
Yeah.
Nobody wins in that scenario.
And what about the impact on innovation? If companies get used to the government being there to bail them out, will they be as motivated to innovate and stay ahead of the curve?
Yeah, it's a valid question. One of the arguments against heavy industrial policy is that it can create a culture of dependency and stifle innovation.
Okay.
Companies might become complacent relying on government support instead of pushing the boundaries and coming up with the next big thing.
So it's a bit of a tightrope walk, right? Governments want to support these industries that are seen as crucial for the future.
Right.
But they also don't want to create a bunch of companies that can't stand on their own 2 feet.
Absolutely. It requires a delicate touch. And then there's the question of who actually benefits from these subsidies. Is it really trickling down to the average person, or is it mostly lining the pockets of large corporations?
That's a great point. After all these programs are funded by taxpayers, so are we getting a good return on our investment?
It's something to consider. And it's not just about the financial cost either. There are also opportunity costs to consider. Every dollar that's spent subsidizing one industry is a dollar that can't be spent on other priorities like education, healthcare, or infrastructure.
You've given us a lot to think about, so we've talked about the U.S. and China, but I'm curious to hear more about how other countries are approaching this, specifically South Korea and Japan. They're both known for their manufacturing prowess, but they seem to be taking a slightly different tack.
They are. They're both trying to leverage their existing strengths while also adapting to this new global landscape. South Korea, for example, has really doubled down on its semiconductor industry.
They're already a powerhouse in that sector.
Exactly, and they're aiming to solidify that dominance. Their president has announced a massive investment plan, hundreds of billions of dollars in public-private partnerships for semiconductor research and development.
Wow, that's a bold move.
Yeah.
And what about Japan? They've always been known for their automotive industry, but it seems like they're also branching out into other areas.
They are indeed. They're making a big push in electric vehicles and batteries, trying to catch up to China in that regard. But they're also investing heavily in things like robotics, artificial intelligence, and renewable energy.
So they're not putting all their eggs in one basket.
Exactly. They're diversifying their bets, trying to stay ahead of the curve and anticipate what the future holds.
It's fascinating to see how each country is approaching this in its own way.
Yeah.
But it makes you wonder, in this global race to dominate these key industries, is anyone really paying attention to the bigger picture?
That's the million-dollar question. We've talked about the economic implications, but there are also environmental and geopolitical considerations to factor in. For instance, the transition to clean energy is essential to combat climate change, but it also has the potential to reshape global power dynamics.
It's like a giant game of chess, with countries making strategic moves to secure their place on the board.
Yeah.
But are we playing checkers while the world burns, so to speak?
It's a valid concern. The challenge is finding a way to foster innovation and economic growth while also addressing these pressing global challenges. It's a tall order, and it requires international cooperation and a long-term perspective.
Speaking of a long-term perspective, one of the things that struck me about Thompson's paper was his point about how this new wave of industrial policy isn't just some passing fad. It's a fundamental shift in the way governments are thinking about their role in the economy.
Absolutely. For decades, the prevailing wisdom, especially in the West, was that governments should take a hands-off approach to the economy, let the free market work its magic. But the pendulum seems to be swinging back in the other direction.
So what's driving this shift? Why are governments suddenly so eager to flex their industrial muscles, so to speak?
There are a number of factors at play. One is the growing realization that certain industries like semiconductors are just too important to national security to be left entirely to the whims of the market.
That makes sense, especially in a world where technology is becoming increasingly intertwined with national security.
Exactly. And then there's the rise of China. Their economic success, fueled in part by their own brand of industrial policy, has forced other countries to rethink their approach.
It's like everyone is playing catch-up to China, trying to figure out how to compete in this new global landscape. But it also feels like there's an opportunity here, right? A chance to build a more sustainable and equitable global economy.
There is, but it will require a shift in mindset. We need to move away from this zero-sum game mentality where one country's gain is another country's loss.
So how do we do that? How do we ensure that this new era of industrial policy leads to a better future for everyone, not just a select few?
That's the billion-dollar question. And unfortunately, there's no easy answer. But one thing is clear. We need to have a serious conversation about the rules of the game.
You mean things like international trade agreements and regulations?
Exactly. We need to update these rules to reflect this new reality and ensure that everyone is playing on a level playing field. Otherwise, we risk sliding into a world of protectionism and conflict, which benefits no one.
It's a daunting challenge, but it's also an incredibly exciting time to be thinking about these issues. The decisions we make today will have a profound impact on the shape of the global economy for decades to come.
Absolutely. And it's not just up to governments to figure this out. Businesses, investors, and everyday citizens all have a role to play in shaping this new industrial order.
It's a collective effort. We're all in this together. We've covered a lot of ground today, but I want to circle back to something you mentioned earlier about the environmental impact of all of this. It seems like there's a real tension between the need to boost manufacturing and the need to address climate change.
You've hit on a crucial point. The way we manufacture things has a huge impact on the environment. Traditional manufacturing processes are often energy-intensive and reliant on fossil fuels, which contribute to climate change.
So how do we square that circle? How do we ramp up manufacturing without accelerating climate change?
That's where innovation comes in. One of the most promising developments is the rise of green manufacturing, which focuses on using cleaner technologies and processes that minimize environmental impact.
Green manufacturing. I like the sound of that. Tell me more.
It's all about finding ways to produce goods with fewer emissions, less waste, and a smaller overall environmental footprint. This can involve things like using renewable energy sources to power factories, adopting more efficient manufacturing techniques, and designing products with sustainability in mind.
So it's not just about making different things, it's about making things differently.
Exactly. And that's where some of these government subsidies can actually play a positive role. By investing in green manufacturing technologies and supporting companies that are trying to make their operations more sustainable, governments can help drive the transition to a cleaner, greener economy.
It's like hitting two birds with one stone, boosting manufacturing, while also addressing climate change. But let's be realistic, green manufacturing is still in its early stages. How do we ensure that it becomes the norm, not just a niche trend?
That's the challenge, isn't it? It requires a multifaceted approach. Governments need to create policies that incentivize green manufacturing, businesses need to embrace sustainable practices, and consumers need to demand products that are made in an environmentally responsible way.
It's a shared responsibility. We all have a part to play in making this happen.
Exactly. And the good news is that there's growing momentum behind this movement. More and more companies are realizing that sustainability isn't just good for the planet, it's also good for business.
It's no longer just about corporate social responsibility. It's about staying competitive in a world that's increasingly demanding sustainable solutions.
Precisely. Consumers are becoming more aware of the environmental impact of their purchasing decisions, and they're increasingly willing to support companies that align with their values.
So it's not just about government mandates, it's also about market forces driving change.
Absolutely. And that's ultimately how we're going to create a truly sustainable future. It's not about one sector or one country taking the lead. It's about everyone working together towards a common goal.
We've covered a lot of ground today, from the intricacies of industrial policy to the promise of green manufacturing. It's clear that the future of manufacturing is full of both challenges and opportunities.
It certainly is. It's a complex and constantly evolving landscape, but by staying informed, asking critical questions, and engaging in constructive dialogue, we can help shape a future where manufacturing benefits both people and the planet.
Beautifully said. Now, let's bring it back to our listener. You might be wondering, with all this talk about government subsidies and global competition, what does this actually mean for me? How will this impact my life?
You're absolutely right. This isn't just some abstract economic theory. It has real-world implications for all of us. For example, think about the products you use every day: your phone, your laptop, your car. The manufacturing of these products is becoming increasingly influenced by these global subsidy races.
So are you saying that these government subsidies could actually make those products cheaper for consumers?
It's possible. One of the goals of industrial policy is to create jobs and boost domestic manufacturing, which could lead to lower prices for consumers in the long run.
Yeah.
But there's also a risk that it could have the opposite effect.
How so?
Well, if governments are propping up companies with subsidies, it could discourage competition and innovation. And without that pressure to compete, companies might not have the same incentive to lower prices or improve their products.
So it's a bit of a gamble. There's potential for both positive and negative outcomes for consumers.
Exactly. And it's not just about prices either. These subsidies could also influence the types of products that are available to consumers. If governments are pouring money into certain sectors, like electric vehicles or renewable energy, it could lead to a surge in innovation and development in those areas.
Which is great for consumers who are looking for more sustainable options.
Absolutely. But it could also mean that other sectors, ones that aren't receiving the same level of government support, might lag behind. It's all about trade-offs and unintended consequences.
It sounds like it's still too early to say definitively how this is all going to play out for the average person.
It is. There are a lot of moving parts, and it will take time to see how it all shakes out. But one thing is for sure. This new era of industrial policy is going to have a profound impact on the global economy, and we're only just beginning to feel the effects.
So what's your advice to our listener? How should they navigate this complex and uncertain landscape?
The most important thing is to stay informed. Pay attention to the news, do your research, and don't be afraid to ask questions. The more you understand about the forces shaping the global economy, the better equipped you'll be to make informed decisions about your own life.
That's great advice. Knowledge is power, as they say. Well, this deep dive has been incredibly eye-opening. I feel like we've just scratched the surface of a vast and complex topic.
We certainly have, but I think we've given our listener a lot to think about.
We definitely have.
Yeah.
To our listeners, thanks for joining us on this deep dive into the world of industrial policy and global manufacturing. We hope you found it informative and thought-provoking. Until next time, keep asking questions and stay curious.